Around 9:15 a.m., the children at Pantglass Junior School were already in their seats. Jackets hung neatly, books open, morning lessons just beginning. Above them, unseen and unnoticed, a mountain was already giving way. In less than 5 minutes, everything would change. An entire generation would be gone. This is the Aberfan disaster. Aberfan was a small mining village in South Wales. For generations, coal defined life there. The village existed because of the mine, and it was destroyed by what the mine left behind. Above Aberfan, towering over the town, were massive piles of coal waste. They were called spoil tips, mountains of loose rock, sludge, and debris dug up during mining and dumped onto the hillsides. They weren't solid ground. They were unstable, saturated, and growing heavier every year. Tip number 7 sat right above the village, and it was built directly on top of natural springs, something that should have never happened. Water flowed beneath it constantly, soaking into the waste from below. Over time, the waste behaved less like earth and more like liquid. Engineers would later explain it simply. Once enough water entered the tip, gravity would do the rest. Collapse was not a question of if, only when. Locals had complained for decades. Teachers, parents, miners, all warned that water pooled inside the tips and that they shifted after heavy rain. And placing them above homes, above a school, was dangerous. But nothing changed. The spoil tips stayed where they were, directly above the village, directly above Pantglass Junior School. In the days leading up to October 21st, 1966, it rained heavily. Water soaked deeper and deeper into tip number 7, and inside, the coal waste had liquefied into a thick, unstoppable slurry. Since early morning, the tip had been creeping slowly, shifting little by little. But at 9:13 a.m., the mountain began to move for real. At first, it was slow, but then, suddenly, it surged violently downhill. Pantglass Junior School stood directly in the path. The avalanche slammed into the building with enormous force. Classrooms collapsed, walls folded inward instead of breaking, and desks were crushed together. The school disappeared in seconds. Below, villagers looked up and saw a black wall rushing toward them. Houses were smashed, roads vanished, and farms were swallowed whole. Where the school had been, there was only a mound of dark debris. Silence followed, then screaming. People ran uphill toward the school. Parents clawed at the sludge with their bare hands, desperately trying to reach their children until their fingers bled. Miners arrived, still in work clothes, using shovels meant for coal, not for finding children. Rescue teams came from across the region, but the spoil tip had hardened almost instantly, compressing under its own weight. The deeper they dug, the less air there was. Inside the buried classrooms, survival was almost impossible. Some children were crushed instantly. Others suffocated where they sat. 116 children died, and 28 adults were killed trying to teach, protect, or rescue them. In some classrooms, every student perished. Rescuers worked mostly in silence, terrified that vibration might trigger another collapse. The spoil tip above them still loomed. Even after killing dozens, it remained a threat. At one point, rescuers uncovered a classroom clock. It had stopped at 9:13 a.m., the exact moment the first surge from the collapsing tip reached the school. Though the building would not be fully engulfed for another 2 minutes, the clock became a haunting reminder of that instant when disaster began. It was later removed and returned to the village, where it remains a permanent marker of the tragedy. The emotional toll was overwhelming. Many rescuers were minors, fathers themselves, digging for children who could have been their own. Some had to be pulled away after finding bodies. Others refused to stop, even after collapsing from exhaustion. One rescuer later said the smell never left him, not for decades. The acrid stench of mud, coal slurry, and the tragedy it carried lingered in his memory. When the final bodies were recovered, the village did not return to normal. Parents waited for children who would never come home. Bedrooms remained untouched. Shoes stayed by doors. Survivors spoke of guilt, of being absent that day, of being late, of surviving when others did not. Word of the disaster spread quickly. Within hours, Aberfan was front-page news nationwide. Cameras arrived, reporters stood on rooftops, and images of grieving parents and mud-covered rescuers were broadcast across Britain. As the scale became clear, the village cemetery ran out of space. White coffins lined the streets. Funerals blended together until they were no longer distinct days, but one long procession of grief. Then came the question no one wanted to answer. How did this happen? Investigators quickly uncovered the truth. The National Coal Board, or the NCB, the government body responsible for mining, had known the risks. Engineers knew springs ran beneath the tip, and reports warned that tipping waste on waterlogged ground was dangerous. Local residents had written letters, teachers had raised concerns, and miners had noticed the tip shifting after heavy rainfall. But nothing stopped operations. Waste piled higher and higher as the village remained below. During the official inquiry, one moment stood out. A senior coal board official admitted that no one had ever inspected the foundation of the spoil tip, not once. They assumed it was stable because it had always been there. That assumption killed innocent children. The inquiry's findings were unusually blunt. The disaster was described as entirely preventable. Responsibility was clear. This was not nature, it was negligence. But accountability never followed. No one was fired nor went to prison. And although the inquiry blamed the National Coal Board, the organization was never prosecuted or fined for its role in the disaster. The NCB initially offered only £50, about $140 at the time, to families of those who died, an amount that was later increased. Ultimately, they paid £500, about $1,400 per fatality, along with additional sums for traumatized survivors and damaged property, bringing total compensation to roughly £160,000, about $450,000. Worse still, money from a public disaster relief fund donated to help grieving families was used to remove the remaining spoil tips. The village paid to fix the danger that had killed its children. Aberfan never truly recovered. Survivors grew up carrying trauma they struggled to manage, and parents never stopped grieving. The school was never rebuilt on that site. Instead, a memorial garden stands there now. Where desks once stood, there's grass. Where laughter echoed, there's stone. Names are carved into white arches, each one a future that never arrived. Above it all, the hills remain, finally cleared of spoil tips, all too late. The Aberfan disaster changed safety laws across the UK. Spoil tips became regulated and inspections became mandatory, but the lesson was paid for in children's lives. Today, Aberfan is remembered not just as a tragedy, but as a warning about ignored voices, about decisions made for convenience, about what happens when responsibility is delayed until there's no time left. The mountain didn't collapse because of nature, it collapsed because people allowed it to. At 9:15 a.m., the children were ready to learn. By 9:20, an entire future was buried, and nothing that followed ever made that right. Thank you everybody for watching the video. If you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'd really appreciate the support.